Creating this beautiful Western design bracelet using a 2-hole slider bead as a focal bead and a fold over magnetic clasp to finish off the design. In this beading tutorial, you will learn how to create your own dangles as well as do a basic wire wrapping technique and finish everything off. Forewarning, this bracelet design is a bit long in the tutorial area because I want to go over every step, and these steps can get a little lengthy. But just know that this tutorial is great for beginners because you will learn how to create your own dangles, how to finish off bracelets, and so much more. With all that being said, we're going to start at the dangles. I always start out with my dangles if I know I'm going to be using them on any kind of design. These dangles are done all in the exact same fashion, you just change all the different beads. I always start out with some longer head pins, 2 or 3 inch long. When adding the beads to your head pins, you want to make sure that the beads are not going to fall off the head of the pin. This will be dependent on the hole size of the bead. It doesn't really depend on the size of the bead, but how big the hole is, because you don't want the head of the pin going through the hole. Some of them will be really obvious and your bead will fall right off, and other ones will kind of swallow up the head of the pin. In these cases, you want to put a small bead at the bottom to keep the head of the pin from falling through the hole. Once the beads are on the pin, then it's time to do the wire wrapping to create the loop for the dangle. I usually do my dangles all the same. I start by creating a 90-degree angle at the very top with my finger. Then grab your needle nose pliers to create the loop at the top. These are a round nose plier type, so you can make the loop around the tine, and then it's kind of a wrist action where you go up and then wrap the tail around the base. I use my fingers to wrap the tail around, but you could also use some other pliers. I just always seem to be using my hands. It's probably why my hands are half beat up most of the time. Oh, I got a little bit smart and decided to grab some pliers myself. Then I just continued wrapping that tail around, and I will cut off anything that's left over and tuck it in so it doesn't grab onto your sweater or scratch someone. You'll repeat this process over and over again using different beads to create different looking dangles. Sometimes I'll just sit and create dangles while I'm watching TV at night because it is kind of peaceful. If you're new to wire wrapping and dangle creation, don't worry, you are going to make mistakes, and that's okay. You can just cut off your beads and start over if you need to. Once I have a nice pile of dangles, then I'm going to start creating that wire shape at the end of this bracelet design. Again, this is a very easy wire wrapping process, but I'm going to break it down for you. I start with a piece of 20 gauge wire. It'll be about 5 or 6 inches long. For this tutorial, I'm just using basic craft wire. This doesn't have to be perfect because you can always cut it down later. Then I fold it in half. From here, I'll grab the center of the wire with my round nose pliers and twist it around to create a loop at the one end. You may need to take a little bit of finesse to make that loop the way you want it. During the process, for some reason, one of the legs of my loop turned out longer than the other, so I'm just snipping it off. Then I put it into the 2-hole slider bead by sticking the 2 legs into the outer holes. This is just to get an idea of how long I want to have it. If you do this step, just keep in mind that you're going to have some wire for your wire wrapping. This is basically the bare bones of the idea. I'm going to add some dangles and some beads to this wire. For this particular design, I added 2 tiny silver beads at the bottom near the loop, and then I started stringing up the charms, some beads, and just fill in that wire. How many charms and beads you put on your design just depends on how long you want that particular part of this bracelet design. Again, there is no right or wrong way to do this. I just kind of stagger everything so that way the charms aren't all stuck together. And then I will put it into the focal bead to see if I like the length and what it looks like before I wire wrap it on. I like to create these beading tutorials to just give you ideas and give you techniques that I utilize for our 2-hole slider beads, but you can just have fun with it. If you don't like how this turns out, you want more beads, add more beads. If you want less, take some off. It really doesn't matter. Once you have the wire portion, the length that you want it, then you're going to have to fold over the legs of the wire to start wire wrapping the design. I have never, not once, called myself a professional wire wrapper, but this is a very simplistic wire wrapping technique. I basically fold the legs over and I wire wrap it upon itself to hold it all together. As you can see, when I fold it over, it naturally leaves this gap, which will be great for my wire wrap that I need to put in there to finish everything off. For this particular design, I folded the wire towards the outside and then I looped it around within itself. Again, this is probably why my fingers are always torn up, because I should be using pliers, not my fingers. I'll loop the tail around upon itself a couple of times on each side, and then I will snip off the ends and tuck them in neatly so they don't scratch the person wearing it or grab onto like your sweater. And here I come with some pliers. I don't know why this late in the game I decide that pliers is going to make this a lot easier. And it does. If you use needle nose pliers, you can grab a hold of that tail and just wrap it around. It's actually so simple. And that piece of the bracelet is complete. Next, we will start stringing up the sides of the bracelet design. Here's a better close-up of how I looped the wire over the edge of the 2-hole slider bead. To start the rest of the bracelet design, I'm going to use a lot of filler beads and a fold over magnetic clasp. So I start gathering up my filler beads and I use fishing line for my stringing material. Because the one side of the focal bead has that wire design and the other side doesn't, one side of your bracelet bracelet is going to be longer than the other side. When it's all said and done, they're basically the same. I start the design out with some tiny little silver beads. This will space out the string a little bit, so that way I don't have fighting larger beads on the string. I talk about how to deal with these fighting larger beads in other tutorials and videos. I didn't really film this process because basically once you loop the string through the loop and start stringing up the bracelet design, you just stack your beads however you want on each string. What I'm doing here is what I call girl measuring. I actually didn't use a measuring tape. I wanted to see how long I needed to make each side because I knew with that wire design, one side was going to be shorter than the other. If you have bead stoppers like I'm using right here, you want to make sure that you have beads that are going to be the thickness of that bead stopper when you're doing this kind of measuring. I don't always recommend this kind of measuring because if you're making jewelry to actually sell, you probably should have it a designed length. But for just making a jewelry piece for yourself, this is perfect. Here's what I had so far, but I didn't like how long it actually had gotten because I have to add the clasp as well. And our clasps are about 1 inch long. The clasp I chose for this design is 4296, which I probably should have chosen the other one, which is 7857. Because the holes go sideways rather than up and down. This would allow this clasp to lay a little flatter when worn. But anyway, this actually worked out okay. I just thought this might be a bit of a learning lesson should you want to try a clasp. Continuing on with our bracelet design, I will put the string through the loop of the clasp. To finish off this side of the bracelet design, I'm just going to loop the clasp on and tie a knot. Basically, I put one string through one side and one string through the other, so that way it's looped on and good and tight. Then I'll tie a knot. The knot is pretty well hidden because I used these chips. Now it's time to start the other side of the bracelet. I always do each side of my bracelets separately. I'll be starting at the clasp end for this side of the bracelet, and I will end at the focal bead by tying a knot behind the focal bead. I didn't do a lot of filming of stringing the beads on the string, but basically it's just basic stringing along, and sometimes you can make a pattern and sometimes you don't. It just depends on what you like. Again, this is supposed to be fun and not full of rules. Then you string the string through the outer side of the holes of the 2-hole slider bead. I emphasize the direction of the string going into the holes because you're going to make a knot behind the focal bead. For many of my designs, I start at the focal bead and I end at the clasp, but for this design, I went backwards for this side. I essentially did the same girl measuring by putting it on my wrist before I finalized this whole thing, and then I tied a knot behind the focal bead and I snipped it off with some nail clippers. By using nail clippers, I can get up close and tight to the knot, making it a very professional finish. I just do a quick tug to make sure everything is good and tight, and we're done. As you can see, creating this beautiful bracelet design is not complicated. It just has a few more steps than just a basic double-stranded design through a 2-hole slider bead. I prefer using our Fold Over Magnetic Clasp because they are so simple to use and get on and off on your own. And this big, beautiful floral slider bead made the perfect focal bead. If you're interested in learning more about 2-hole slider beads and fold over magnetic clasps, follow along. I do beading tutorials here on social media all the time. If you're interested in purchasing, the link is in my bio.